Have you ever wondered what it would be like to live in hell on Earth? In places where human dignity is crushed and survival is a daily struggle? Today, we're diving into the darkest side of the global prison system, revealing the inhumane and shocking conditions in some of the world's most dangerous prisons. This is what life is like in one of the worst prisons in the world, and it's just one among many extremely violent and dangerous facilities out there. Prepare to hear stories of cannibalism, unimaginable torture, extreme overcrowding, and brutal violence. These prisons make any horror movie scenario look like child's play. Stick with us to uncover the real-life conditions behind the bars of these hells on Earth. Gitarama Prison, located in Rwanda, Africa, is widely considered the most horrifying prison on the planet. There isn't enough space or food for everyone, and there are even reports of cannibalism. Originally designed to hold around 400 to 500 inmates, it now houses nearly 7,000. Escape attempts are nearly impossible since it's situated in a remote area on the edge of the jungle, surrounded by landmines. Those who try to flee across the field end up mutilated and often return to the prison for medical help. The prison lacks beds. Some sleep on wooden boards, while others are crammed together on the floor. The space is so tight that prisoners must take turns resting. Many lose their legs due to fatigue, inflammation, and infections. Prisoners are practically piled on top of each other on the floor or against the walls, leaving no way to move around without bumping into or stepping on others. Even air is a scarce resource, and many inmates suffocate from the lack of oxygen. They suffer from burst eardrums, bites from other prisoners, and foot rot from standing barefoot on unsanitary floors. The guards don't enter the prison, and almost no one goes inside. Food and water are dropped at the gate once a week, and inmates distribute them among themselves. Each week, they also leave waste, barrels of excrement, and even corpses at the gate to be collected. Medical services are voluntary, but there's not enough staff for adequate treatment, and the Rwandan government doesn't take responsibility for these volunteers. Some who have crossed the gate simply vanished on the other side. According to Doctors Without Borders professionals, inmates survive inside for a maximum of 8 months, with 1 in every 8 dying within 5 months. They report that it's hard to tell if the person next to you is alive or dead. Due to the food shortage, prisoners in Gitarama resort to cannibalism, taking the lives of other inmates to eat their flesh and survive. Camp 1391 is a highly secretive detention center in Israel, a concrete fortress hidden on a hilltop. Its location does not appear on maps and has been erased from aerial photographs. Israeli media are prohibited from discussing its geographical location. No one knows for sure what goes on inside, how many people are imprisoned there, and no photos of the prisoners exist. According to former prisoners' accounts, it's filled with political detainees and enemies of the state, many of whom are Lebanese, captured during the years Israel occupied southern Lebanon. Reports mention torture and human rights abuses, especially during interrogations. Mustafa Dirani was detained in Camp 1391 after being abducted in Lebanon in 1994 by Israeli agents. He claimed he was tortured and assaulted by his interrogators. Bachar Jadal, a 50-year-old businessman who was eventually released, stated that he was not beaten or physically tortured because of his age, but spent months in total isolation in a 2-meter cell with no windows, painted black. He was not allowed to hire a lawyer or see other prisoners. When taken out of his cell for interrogation or medical care, he was forced to wear opaque glasses that completely covered his eyes. Other prisoner accounts describe sleeping on wet, decaying mattresses and using buckets as toilets, which were rarely emptied. At night, guards would turn on the air conditioning to make prisoners shiver from the cold. Black Dolphin Prison in Russia is a maximum security prison. The name comes from a black dolphin statue at the prison's entrance. Currently, it holds about 700 prisoners who collectively have committed approximately 4,000 crimes. Everyone there is sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. The prison houses the worst and most dangerous criminals, including murderers, rapists, pedophiles, and even cannibals, such as cannibal Vladimir Nikolaevich Nikolaev. Due to the nature of the inmates, the guards are equally harsh. Prisoners are kept in solitary confinement almost 24 hours a day, with only 90 minutes for exercise outside the cell. They are not allowed to sit or rest from the time they wake up until bedtime, and are served only soup and bread 4 times a day. Ciudad Barrios prison in El Salvador was built to hold 800 inmates, but currently houses about 2,500. It was designed to keep members of the Mara Salvatrucha gang out of society. The gang, which originated in Los Angeles in the 1980s, was formed by immigrants fleeing El Salvador's brutal civil war and has since become one of the world's most feared criminal organizations. The prison houses arms and drug traffickers, murderers, and members of other gangs, and frequent violent incidents among prisoners leave many dead, including guards. The situation is so dire that even the police don't enter the prison facilities. They only stay nearby, avoiding involvement in the internal affairs of the inmates. Inside, the prisoners are managed by representatives of the mafia, and the prison operates like a small, self-governing town, complete with a bakery, hospital, workshops, and a rehabilitation center. Bang Kwang Prison, located 11 kilometers from Bangkok, Thailand's capital, is notorious for torture and harsh conditions. Inmates are forced to sleep crowded together on the cell floor, surviving on a single bowl of rice a day. Bathing is infrequent, typically only once a month, and they must relieve themselves in a hole in the cell floor. Prisoners endure about 3 months with shackled feet, with 4-kilogram chains hammered onto their ankles by guards. Piatak Prison, or Correctional Colony Number 5 in Russia, also known as Russia's Alcatraz, is infamous for being inescapable. Inmates only leave in a coffin. Moscow's government takes pride in the fact that no one has ever successfully escaped. The prison is surrounded by water and swamps, with temperatures ranging from 35 degrees Celsius to minus 30 degrees Celsius. It currently houses 198 prisoners, each sentenced to at least 25 years, for crimes like terrorism, serial murders, sexual abuse, pedophilia, and organized crime. Guards use physical and mental stress techniques and psychological torture to keep prisoners in line. Inmates spend 22 hours per day in tiny cells, and during their 2 hours of outdoor time, they're confined to a small cage. Hygiene conditions are extremely poor, with limited access to basic facilities like toilets, leading to half of the prisoners developing tuberculosis. Torture is common, and inmates must endure extreme cold and snow for most of the year. In North Korea, the regime maintains tight control over its citizens, who are taught that any behavior disapproved of by the government will be punished. Since the Korean War in 1953, around 33,000 North Koreans have fled the country. Those who are caught are sent to prison camps, often referred to as concentration camps. Camp 22, also known as Kwaliso Number 22, or Hwaryong concentration camp, was a political prison established in 1965. Isolated in a valley surrounded by mountains up to 700 meters high, it covered an area of 225 square kilometers and once housed 50,000 prisoners. Overseen by 1,000 guards and 600 armed agents, the facility had a 3,000-volt electric fence surrounding the walls. Conditions were inhumane and sickening, with around 2,000 prisoners dying each year, primarily from malnutrition. Prisoners were given only a daily meal of 365 grams of food, leading many to survive by eating insects, rats, and even dirt. Women in the camp often suffered sexual abuse and were killed if they became pregnant. Torture methods included leaving prisoners in a tank filled with water up to their noses for 24 hours, confining them to a box with no room to sit or squat for up to a week, or forcing them to kneel with a wooden bar placed near their knees to cut off blood circulation. Most couldn't walk after this and would eventually die. Human experiments were also conducted, including gas chamber trials and surgeries performed by medical trainees. It's believed that Camp 22's activities ceased in 2012, but satellite images showed some towers demolished while others seemed operational. The Palmyra prison, located in the Syrian desert, was known as Tadmor Prison and was one of the regime's infamous detention centers. Used to imprison regime opponents, inmates reported harsh survival conditions, torture, human rights abuses, and executions. On June 27, 1980, a state-sponsored massacre occurred. The then-president, Hafez al-Assad, was targeted in an assassination attempt. The next day, his brother ordered the execution of all prisoners in the facility, resulting in at least 1,000 deaths. In 2015, the city fell to the terrorist group ISIS, and the Syrian regime moved the inmates. Shortly after, the terrorists destroyed the prison, with photos showing the horrific conditions inside: cramped, windowless, mold-filled cells with no light or beds. Prisoners had to use a hole in the ground for their needs. There was no heating, despite Syria's extreme winter temperatures. Maracaibo National Prison in Venezuela was once considered one of the most violent prisons in the world. Built to hold 700 inmates, it held 3,700 when it closed in 2013. The prison was severely overcrowded, with nearly 200 children of inmates living there. Violence and sexual assaults were rampant. On January 3, 1994, a riot led to a fire. During this, inmates shot and stabbed those trying to escape, resulting in 150 deaths. The incident drew international attention to the appalling conditions in Venezuelan prisons. The prison closed in 2013 after another riot that claimed 16 lives, with some prisoners dismembered and decapitated. Lastly, we must mention Carandiru. Officially named São Paulo's House of Detention, it was built in 1920 and opened in 1956. Designed to meet Brazil's new penal code regulations, at its peak, Carandiru held 8,000 inmates with only 1,000 guards. Conditions inside were horrendous. Over its 46-year existence, more than 1,300 people died there, most due to mistreatment and poor living conditions. It became the site of one of the largest massacres in the history of Brazil's judicial system, known as the Carandiru Massacre, which occurred on October 2, 1992, during a prison riot. The military police were sent in, and instead of negotiating, they opened fire on the inmates, resulting in the deaths of 111 prisoners. Of these, 102 were shot by the police, while 9 were stabbed and killed by fellow inmates before the police arrived. Carandiru was decommissioned on December 9, 2002, and some of its pavilions were demolished. Over the years, others were renovated and repurposed as cultural and technological centers.